My husband was sneaking into my mother's room every night, so I installed a hidden camera to find out why. And what I found on that tiny little memory card, it broke my heart into 1,000,000 pieces and burned what was left of my 30-year marriage to the ground. I was just standing there in the kitchen, at exactly 7:45 on a Tuesday morning, late in February. The smell of Michael's coffee was still hanging in the air, but the house was quiet. I watched from the kitchen window as his sedan disappeared down the street, and only then did I let myself breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the granite countertop. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a war drum for a battle I didn't know if I was ready to fight. On heavy feet, I went upstairs, past my own bedroom, and stopped in front of my son's old room, the door that was now my mother's. I turned the knob slowly, stepped inside, and went straight to the bookshelf. Behind a dusty photo of the three of us, me, Michael, and our son Daniel, back when he was a smiling little boy, was the tiny camera. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the minuscule memory card, a little piece of plastic that held either my own paranoia or proof of an evil I could barely wrap my head around. But for you to understand just how things got to that awful point, and why I ended up spying on my own husband in my own home, let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Yolanda Williams. I'm 56 years old, and I live in Decatur, a suburb just outside Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a retired history teacher, and until a few months ago, my biggest worry was whether the roses in my garden needed more fertilizer. I was married to Michael for 30 years. 30 years. We built a life together in this house, raised 2 wonderful children. But our foundation, the solid ground I thought we stood on, started to crack 7 years ago. That's when we lost our son, Daniel. Cancer. He was only 33. The death of a child isn't a wound that heals, it's a phantom limb. You feel the ache of it, the absence of it, every single day. It changed us. Michael threw himself into his work, his golf club, anything to keep busy. And I clung to memories and to our daughter Olivia, who was already living in Austin, Texas with her own family. We went on, Michael and I, but the house got quieter. The laughter was rarer. We lived together, but it felt like an invisible distance had settled between us in our bed. It was in the middle of all that, about 3 years back, that my mother, Bernice, started showing the first signs. She was 84, a strong woman who raised me all by herself, tough as nails. But her mind started playing tricks on her. Little things at first. Forgetting where she put her keys, repeating the same story a few times. Early-stage dementia, the doctor said. For a while she managed on her own in her apartment, with daily check-ins and help from neighbors. But it got to a point where it just wasn't safe anymore. One day, she left the stove on and nearly started a fire. That was the sign I needed. I called Olivia, but she had a newborn baby and a tiny house. It just wasn't possible. So, there was only one option left. That night, I made some chamomile tea and sat Michael down in the kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd decided on our children's names, where we'd cried over Daniel's death. Michael, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk to you about Mom. It's getting to be too much for her to be alone. I think she needs to come live with us. He stopped scrolling on his tablet and looked at me over his reading glasses. The silence stretched on. I could hear the tick-tock of the wall clock, each second weighing a ton. Finally, he sighed, a long, tired sound. Look, Yolanda, I love your mother, you know I do, but an elderly person with her issues, that changes the whole dynamic of a house. It changes everything. I know, I said, feeling the tears welling up. But she's my mother. I can't just put her in a home. Not yet. She's still so lucid most of the time. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I know. But what about our life, our space, our peace and quiet? I'll handle everything, I promised, my voice desperate. I won't let it fall on you. I'm retired for this very reason, to have the time. I just need you to say yes. He stared at me for a long time. And then he said the words that, at the time, felt like the greatest act of generosity in the world. But today, they echo in my head as the beginning of a prison sentence. All right, Yolanda, she can come, but on one condition. He leaned forward. You have to be the primary caregiver. I've got my job, my golf club, My commitments. I can't be here around the clock on call. The responsibility has to be on you. In that moment, a wave of relief so powerful washed over me that I almost cried with gratitude. I know, honey, and I thank you for that. So much. You have no idea. In the second week of October, Mom moved in. We fixed up Daniel's old room for her. We put the boxes of his baseball trophies and books up in the attic, painted the walls a soft yellow she loved, and put pictures of her grandkids on the dresser. The first few weeks were a dream. It was like the house had life in it again. The three of us would have breakfast together. I'd spend my days with Mom, doing crosswords, watching old black and white movies, listening to her stories for the 100th time. Michael would come home from work, ask how our day was, and we'd all have dinner. It was a calm period, a kind of Indian summer for our broken family. I truly believed we'd done the right thing. I believed we'd found a new kind of happiness. But then, January came, and with the biting Georgia chill, a coldness crept into our home too. Mom started to seem faded, more tired than usual, picking at her favorite foods. I noticed she was quieter, especially when Michael was around. I tried to brush it off. Dementia progresses, I told myself. It's the winter. It makes people feel down. But deep in my heart, I felt a cold prickle of worry, a feeling I couldn't name, but one that refused to go away. It was like hearing the distant rumble of thunder on a perfectly clear, blue sky day. You try to tell yourself it's just your imagination, but deep down, you know, a storm is coming. That foreboding, that sense of a storm brewing on a clear day, started to take shape a couple of weeks after New Year's. The change in my mother, Bernice, was no longer subtle. She began to shrink inside her own clothes. The food on her plate was barely touched. She would just push the peas from one side to the other with her fork, her head down, as if the simple act of eating took a monumental effort. But it wasn't the fatigue or the lack of appetite that squeezed my heart. It was the fear. It was an almost invisible thing, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. When it was just the two of us in the house during the day, Mom was herself, chatty, stubborn, sometimes forgetful, but she was present. Her eyes would sparkle when she'd tell a story for the 1,000th time about her youth in Savannah. But the moment we heard the sound of Michael's car pulling into the garage, around 6 in the evening, it was like a light switch flipped off inside her. I'd see it instantly. Her shoulders would hunch just a little. Her hands, which had been gesturing as she talked, would fold quietly in her lap. Her voice would drop, almost to a whisper. At the dinner table, she'd barely speak, and her eyes would track Michael's every move. It wasn't the look of someone engaged in conversation. It was a watchful look, the way a small bird watches a cat in the yard, aware of every step, ready to fly at the slightest sign of danger. At first I made excuses, 1,000 of them. I'd tell myself, it's just Michael's stress from work. He comes home tired. Or, he just doesn't know how to handle dementia, he's awkward around her. I even thought that maybe it was hard for him to see someone else in the room that had been our Daniels. I wanted to believe anything other than the ugly truth that was starting to form in the corner of my eye. But the truth has a stubborn way of making itself known. One night, late in January, Michael had a business dinner, so it was just going to be me and Mom. I made her favorite, roasted chicken and potatoes, and without his presence, she ate. She ate with an appetite, had seconds, and even told a joke that made me laugh out loud. It was such a good, normal evening that for a moment I let myself relax. I thought, see, Yolanda, it's all in your head. Later, we were in the living room, watching some random TV show. She was curled up in a blanket on the sofa, looking so small. Out of nowhere, she reached for my hand. Her skin was thin as paper and cold. Yolanda, honey, she started, her voice a whisper. Does he like me being here? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I squeezed her hand. Of course he does, Mom. Why would you even ask that? She looked down at her own hands in her lap. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm a burden, like I'm in the way of your lives. Never, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Don't you ever think that. You are not a burden. This is your home. We love you. I hugged her tight, feeling her frail bones under her pajamas. She seemed to settle down, But her question planted a cold seed of doubt in my chest, a seed that started to sprout in early February on a lazy Saturday afternoon. We were on the sofa again. I was reading a book and she was knitting, or trying to. Her hands weren't as steady anymore. She was wearing a blue wool cardigan. At one point, she reached for a ball of yarn that had rolled onto the floor, and the sleeve of her cardigan rode up just a little, exposing her forearm. And that's when I saw it. My blood ran cold. There, on her pale, thin skin, was an ugly, purplish-yellow stain right in the middle of her forearm. It was large, and in the center of the bruise, was a darker, almost perfectly round mark. The exact size of a thumbprint. It wasn't a normal bump. It was the mark of a grip. I put my book down. My voice came out as a thread. "Mom, what is that on your arm?" Instantly, she yanked her sleeve down, covering the mark. Her eyes went wide and she looked away, staring at the wall. "Oh, that? It's nothing. I bumped it on the closet door. I was getting a coat and I bumped it. You know how clumsy I am." But she wouldn't look at me. And the way she spoke, the rush to hide it, the sudden fear in her eyes, it screamed that she was lying. I'd seen my mother bump into furniture 1,000 times. The marks were scrapes, irregular shapes, swellings. This was different. This was the mark of a hand, of a finger, of force. I just sat there, my heart hammering in my ears, the book forgotten in my lap. "You bumped it on the door," I repeated in a flat voice, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the wall, feigning a sudden interest in the texture of the paint. In that moment, staring at the sleeve of the cardigan that hid that awful mark, I knew. I didn't know how or why. I didn't even want to imagine it, but I knew I had to talk to Michael, and it was not going to be a pleasant conversation. I waited for the rest of Saturday afternoon to pass in a haze of anxiety. Every time I looked at my mother, curled up on the sofa, tugging at her cardigan sleeve to make sure her arm was covered, a knot formed in my throat. I decided I couldn't talk to Michael in front of her. It had to be after she went to bed. That night, dinner was nearly silent. The tension was so thick I could swear the roast beef on my plate tasted like ash. Michael talked about golf, about some deal he'd closed at work, and I just nodded and mumbled, "That's nice, honey," while my brain rehearsed the confrontation to come. Around 9, I helped Mom get ready for bed. As I tucked her in and pulled the covers up, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Lock the door, Yoli," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "Why, Mom? No one's going to come in here," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just, please, lock it." Her request was like a knife in my heart. I closed her bedroom door, but I didn't lock it. Instead, I went downstairs, where Michael was watching a game on TV, the sound filling the quiet house. I took a deep breath and went to the kitchen. I needed something to hold on to. I got a glass of water and waited. A few minutes later, he came in, yawning. "Boring game. Think I'm going to turn in?" "Michael, wait," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd intended. "We need to talk." He stopped, leaning against the doorframe. "This late, Yolanda? Is something wrong?" "Yes, something's wrong." I set my glass down on the counter with a dull thud. "I saw a mark on my mother's arm today, a bad bruise." He frowned, a look of calculated confusion. "A bruise? Where?" "On her forearm. And it wasn't just any bruise, Michael. It looked like a grip, like a thumbprint." He laughed, not a real laugh, but a puff of air, a dismissive sound that made my stomach churn. "Oh, for God's sake, Yolanda." He walked over, getting a glass for himself. "She's old. Old people bruise easily. Their skin is like paper. She probably doesn't even remember how she got it." They were the exact words I had dreaded hearing. The cold logic, the dismissal. She said she bumped it on the closet door, but she was scared. And the mark doesn't look like a bump from a door. That's when his tone shifted. The fake patience vanished, replaced by a sharp irritation. "And what are you implying? That I did it?" He looked me right in the eye, challenging me. "Is that it, Yolanda? After 30 years, you think I would hurt your mother?" He had a way of making me feel like I was the crazy one. He was a master at turning things around, at putting me on the defensive. "I'm not implying anything," I lied, backing down. "I'm just worried. And she's been acting scared around you. Scared? She has dementia. Her moods swing from 1 hour to the next. One minute she's laughing, the next she's crying because she can't remember the president's name. You're being overprotective and paranoid. Is this what it's going to be like now? Every little scrape, every little purple spot is going to turn into an investigation. I warned you this would change our lives. He drank his water in one gulp and slammed the glass in the sink. I'm going to bed, and I suggest you stop looking for trouble where there isn't any. He turned and left the kitchen, leaving me standing there, alone, under the cold, fluorescent light. I felt small, stupid. Was he right? Was my worry and my grief over my mother's condition making me see monsters in the dark? I went to bed that night feeling guilty and confused. But the seed of suspicion, once it's planted, doesn't die so easily. In the weeks that followed, it only got worse. Bernice's fear became so palpable that she basically exiled herself to her room whenever Michael was home. I'd bring her meals up on a tray, and she'd only come out when she was sure he wasn't around. And the marks, they kept appearing. A small purplish bruise on her wrist, which she hid under her sleeve. A reddish blotch on her collarbone that I only saw for a second when she bent over. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was coming down the stairs when I heard quiet voices from the kitchen. It was Michael and my mother. He'd come home early. I stopped halfway down the stairs, hidden by the wall. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone. It was low, sharp, and cold. It was the tone of voice you use to scold a dog. I heard my mother murmur something, a weak, almost inaudible reply. Then I took a step, making the stair creak. Instantly, Michael's voice changed. "Oh, there it is, Bernice," he said, his voice suddenly loud, warm, full of a fake cheerfulness that made me sick to my stomach. "I was just helping your mom find the sugar, honey," he said, turning to me with a smile that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. My mother was standing by the counter, hunched over, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked like a child who'd been caught misbehaving. He walked past me, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'm going to go take a shower before dinner." I just stood there, watching his back as he went up the stairs. That fake smile, the sudden switch. It was like seeing an actor's mask slip for just a second, revealing the cruel face underneath. And it was in that exact moment, standing there in my quiet kitchen, that a piece clicked into place. A terrible, awful piece. Mom was always worse in the morning. Always more tired, more scared, more confused. It was in the mornings that I'd noticed the bruises that weren't there the night before. Not during the day, when I was with her. Not at dinner, when we were all together. An icy dread started to creep up my spine. The truth was so horrific, my mind tried to reject it. Something was happening during the night, when I was asleep, when the only one awake and moving through the house was my husband. The revelation in that kitchen left me paralyzed. I couldn't move. The smell of the dinner I'd started cooking in the oven suddenly seemed nauseating. Everything in my home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt wrong, tainted. The thought was so monstrous that a part of me wanted to run, to scream, to claw it out of my head. Michael, my Michael, the man I'd built a life with, the father of my children, the man who cried on my shoulder as we buried Daniel, would be hurting my sick, elderly mother. At night, in secret, I spent the next few days on high alert, living in two worlds at once. In the world on the surface, I was the same old Yolanda. I made coffee, straightened up the house, chatted with my mother, asked my husband how his day was. But in the world inside, I was a detective, a spy. Every word he said was analyzed. Every look was measured. I watched him when he spoke to my mother, looking for that cold glint in his eye, that tension in his jaw. And the more I looked, the more I found. His impatience when she took too long to answer a question. The irritated sigh when she dropped a fork. The way he would physically pull away if she got too close. I started sleeping badly. Any sound in the house would jolt me awake. The creak of a floorboard, the flush of a toilet, the hum of the refrigerator. I would lie there, motionless, next to Michael's sleeping body, holding my breath, straining to hear. I'd wonder, is he getting up now? Is he leaving the room? Several times, I thought about getting up and standing watch in the hallway. But I knew if he caught me, it would all be over. He would use it against me, say I was delusional, that I needed help. His denial in the kitchen had been so powerful, it had shaken me. I couldn't confront him again without proof, hard, undeniable proof. The idea of the camera came to me during one sleepless night, around 3 in the morning. The room was dark, the only light coming from the red numbers on the alarm clock. Michael was snoring softly beside me. The thought just appeared in my mind, fully formed and terrifying. What if I could see? My heart started beating faster. A camera. A hidden camera. The idea felt both brilliant and like a horrific betrayal. To spy on my own husband? To plant a secret device in my home? In my mother's bedroom? It was the kind of thing you see in movies, not in the real life of a retired history teacher from Decatur. And the fear of what I might find was almost as great as the fear of doing nothing. What if I was wrong? What if I set up the camera and saw nothing but my mother sleeping peacefully all night? I would have destroyed 30 years of trust for a crazy suspicion. I would have to look at my husband every day, knowing I had accused him, in my own mind, of the cruelest thing imaginable. But then, a stronger image took over. The image of the bruise on her arm, the shape of a thumb, the fear in her eyes when she whispered, "Lock the door, Yoli." And I knew that the risk of being wrong was a luxury I could no longer afford. My mother's safety was worth more than my marriage. It was worth more than the fragile peace we were keeping in that house. The next day, I waited for Michael to leave. I went to my computer and searched for small spy cameras. There were hundreds of them. I needed one with night vision, one that recorded on motion detection, and one small enough to hide. I found one, disguised as a phone charger, for $180. The price of the truth. I couldn't use our credit card. He'd see the bill. So I went to the bank and withdrew $200 in cash from my personal account. Then I drove 40 minutes to an electronics store on the other side of town where I knew no one would recognize me. I paid in cash. The kid at the counter, a young man with headphones on, barely looked at me. To him, I was just another old lady buying a gadget. He had no idea I was buying a weapon. I spent the rest of the day with my stomach in knots, the small box heavy in my purse. That night at dinner, I could barely swallow. After Michael went to the bedroom to watch TV, I told my mother I needed to straighten some things on her bookshelf. "Let me help you, dear," she said, trying to get up. "No, Mom, you stay put. I'll be quick." My heart was pounding. Her room was small. The dark wood bookshelf stood right across from her bed, filled with old books and picture frames. I had the perfect spot in mind. There was a photo of the three of us, me, Michael, and Daniel, on a picnic years ago. We were all smiling. The sun was shining. A framed lie. The camera, small and black, fit perfectly behind the picture frame. The tiny eye of the lens peeking through a gap between the photo and the frame. I plugged it into a power strip, hidden behind the books. I turned it on. A small blue light blinked and then went dark. It was armed. I felt a wave of nausea. I had just turned my mother's bedroom into a potential crime scene. I felt dirty, like a traitor. But when I turned and looked at her, sitting on the edge of her bed, so fragile, I knew I had no choice. I was her only protector. That night, I lay in bed next to Michael, as stiff as a board. I pretended to be asleep, but every fiber of my being was on high alert. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m. I was almost giving up, almost convincing myself I was crazy, when I heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a familiar creak, the protest of a floorboard in the hallway, right outside our bedroom door. I knew that sound. Michael was getting up. I held my breath. The air in the room felt like it had frozen. I didn't dare open my eyes. I heard his bare feet, soft on the carpet. I heard the almost inaudible click of our bedroom doorknob. He was out. He closed the door behind him. And then, the sound that turned my blood to ice in my veins. The soft, almost whispering sound of my mother's bedroom door opening in the darkness of the hall. I lay there, in the pitch black, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard across the house. I didn't know what was happening in that room, but I knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that the camera was recording everything. I don't know if I slept that night. I think I drifted in and out of an anxious daze where every little sound in the house was amplified 1,000 times. The hum of the heater, the settling of the house's foundation, the distant wail of a siren, and the most torturous of all, the silence. The silence that followed the click of my mother's bedroom door. I don't know how long he was in there. 10 minutes? 15? It felt like an eternity. When I finally heard her door open and close again, and the floorboards creak as he returned to our room, I curled into a ball, turning my back to his side of the bed, my whole body tense. I felt the mattress dip as he got in. I felt the warmth of his body just inches from mine. The man I had shared a bed with for 30 years, and I had never felt so cold in my life. The next morning was the performance of a lifetime. The alarm went off at 6:30, like always. Michael stretched, yawned, and leaned over to kiss my cheek. "Morning, honey," he said. The touch of his lips on my skin felt like a piece of ice. I forced a smile. "Morning." We got up, we did our routine. He showered, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. Every movement was automatic, rehearsed. I felt like a spectator watching a movie of my own life. When he came downstairs, dressed for work, I handed him his mug of coffee, my hands steady only by sheer force of will. "I'm heading out a little early today. Got an 8:30 meeting," he said, sipping his coffee as he scrolled through the news on his tablet. "All right, dear," I replied, my voice neutral. "Drive safe." He finished his coffee, put the mug in the sink, gave me another quick kiss, and left. "See you tonight." The moment I heard the garage door close and the sound of his car engine fading away, it was like a string holding me upright was cut. My legs buckled, and I grabbed onto the counter. I took a deep breath, then another, then a third. "You can do this, Yolanda. You have to know." I left a note from my mother saying I was running a quick errand and would be right back, and I went upstairs, my heart in my throat. I slipped into her room. She was still sleeping, a heavy, restless sleep. I went to the bookshelf, took the picture frame, and with fingers that were now trembling more than ever, I retrieved the small memory card from the camera. I held it in the palm of my hand. A tiny piece of black plastic, Pandora's box. I went down to my home office, closed the door, and slipped the card into my laptop. The file folder opened. There was just one video. A single file, time-stamped, 12:25 a.m. I double-clicked. The screen filled with the grainy black and white image of my mother's room. The night vision gave everything a ghostly feel. I could see the bed, her outline under the covers. The door was in the top left of the frame. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the quiet sound of her breathing. Then, the doorknob turned, slow, silent. The door opened, and Michael's silhouette filled the frame. My stomach twisted into a knot. He closed the door behind him. A soft click. He stood there for a second, just looking at the bed. Then he moved closer. He didn't turn on a light. He leaned over her and shook her. Not gently. It was a rough, violent jolt. "Bernice, wake up." His voice on the video was a whisper, but it was a harsh whisper, full of venom. My mother stirred, startled, and tried to sit up. "Michael, what is it?" "Lie down," he snarled, and he shoved her back against the pillows. Her frail body gave way with no resistance. "You think this is a hotel?" he went on, his voice a hiss. "You think you can just come here and ruin my life? Ruin my peace? I have no quiet in this house anymore because of you." My mother started to cry. They were silent, choked sobs that were soul-shattering. I clapped my hand over my own mouth, feeling the bile rise in my throat. I was watching a horror movie, and the monsters were my husband, and the victim, my mother. "You're a burden, Bernice," he spat the words. "A useless burden. Yolanda doesn't see it. She's blind. But I see it. I see you sucking the life out of us, sucking away our money, our time." Then he did something that made all the air leave my lungs. He leaned in and grabbed her forearm, the same arm where I'd seen the bruise. He pulled her up a little in the bed, his face inches from hers. The camera picked up every word with a terrible, crystal clarity. "You are not going to say a word about this to Yolanda. Not one word. If you do, I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find. A place where no one will visit you, where you will rot by yourself. Do you understand me?" My mother, sobbing, her body shaking, just nodded her head. Yes. Good. He shoved her back down on the bed hard, her head hitting the headboard with a dull thud. He straightened up, looked down at her for one more second with pure contempt, and walked out of the room as quietly as he had entered. The video played on for another few minutes, showing nothing but my mother crying alone in the dark. I slammed the laptop shut. The shock was a physical wave. I felt my whole body start to shake, a coldness that came from the inside out. It was worse. It was 1,000 times worse than anything I could have possibly imagined. It wasn't impatience. It wasn't stress. It was cruelty. Pure, calculated, sadistic cruelty. And it had been going on for weeks, maybe months, right under my nose, while I slept. The tears I had held back for so long finally came, hot and furious. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. A rage so deep, so cold, it burned. The image of my mother's terrified face, the sound of my husband's venomous voice, it was seared into my brain. I stood up. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at the woman in the mirror. Her face was blotchy. Her eyes were red. But there was something new there, a hard, steely resolve. The ache in my chest was still there, the pain of betrayal, of a 30-year marriage turning to dust before my eyes. But on top of it, something stronger was growing. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. That's what he'd expect. That would give him the chance to deny, to lie, to manipulate me one more time. No. I was going to be as cold and as calculating as he was. I went back to the office, took the memory card, and put it back in the camera. I went upstairs, slipped into my mother's room, and put the camera back in its hiding place, behind the photo of our happy family. Tonight, it would record again, and the night after that, and the one after that. I wasn't just going to prove what he was doing. I was going to build his cage, piece by piece, video by video. He thought he had all the power, hidden in the darkness. He had no idea the darkness now had eyes. From that day on, my life became a stage play. I became the lead actress in a performance about a happy marriage. The script was simple. Smile, be pleasant, pretend everything is fine. But behind the curtain, in the backstage of my mind, I was the director of a dark and lonely operation. Each day was a countdown, each night a new collection of evidence. Living under the same roof with him became a form of psychological torture. Every affectionate gesture from him felt repulsive. When he'd hug me coming home from work, I had to fight the urge to flinch, to feel his skin, the same hand that gripped my mother's arm, touching mine. At dinner, I watched him over the rim of my glass. The way he cut his steak, the way he talked about his day at the office, it all seemed like a grotesque charade. How could a man harbor so much darkness and still laugh at a joke on TV? Who was this person I had slept next to for 30 years? I looked at him and saw a stranger, a monster wearing my husband's face. My main focus was my mother. During the day, I worked twice as hard to create a bubble of safety around her. We read, we talked, I made her favorite foods, but I saw the fear in her eyes, a constant, humming fear that never left her. She barely left her room. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell her. I couldn't say, "Mom, I know. I saw it. I'm going to protect you." Telling her meant risking everything. If she changed her behavior, if she confronted him, he'd know something was up. He might find the camera, and I would lose my only weapon. So I had to keep up the play, even with her. I just hugged her tighter and told her, "It's going to be okay, Mom. I'm here." And every morning, the same agonizing routine. Wait for him to leave. Go upstairs with my heart pounding. Retrieve the memory card. Go down to my office and lock the door. And watch the previous night's horror show. The second night was almost a repeat of the first. The same stealthy entrance. The same verbal humiliation. "You're starting to smell old," he whispered to her. "This whole house is starting to stink because of you." He didn't touch her that night, but the words were like slaps. I saved the video to a secure, password-protected folder on my computer. I named the folder Project Justice. The third night was worse. He came into the room and saw that she'd left a glass of water on her nightstand. He picked it up and threw it against the wall. The sound of the glass shattering on the video made me jump in my chair. My mother let out a small, terrified cry. "Learn to clean up after yourself, you useless old woman," he snarled before walking out. In the morning when I went to wake her, I saw the broken glass on the carpet. "Oh my God, Mom, what happened?" I asked, feigning surprise. She just shook her head, trembling. I must have knocked it over in the night. I cleaned up the shards, my hands shaking with rage, feeling every piece of glass like a stab in my own heart. The fourth night, he pinched her, hard. On the video, I saw his hand dart out like a snake, squeezing the skin on her upper arm. She whimpered in pain. The next morning, the purple mark was there, exactly as it was on the video. I had another piece of proof, but it was on the fifth night that I discovered something that took the abuse to a whole new level of evil. Something that showed me he wasn't just trying to scare her or humiliate her. He was drugging her. I watched the video. He came in, like always. But this time, he had something in his hand. 2 small, white pills. He shook my mother awake. What is that?" she mumbled, groggy. "Your sleeping medicine," he said, his voice falsely calm. But Yolanda already gave me my medicine before bed." His calmness vanished. "You'll take what I give you. Open your mouth." She hesitated, turning her face away. He grabbed her by the chin. Her head was forced back against the pillow. I said, "Open your mouth." With his other hand, he shoved the 2 pills into her mouth. I saw her body flinch, gagging. He grabbed the water glass from her nightstand and forced it to her lips. "Swallow all of it." After she swallowed, coughing and sputtering, he let her go. He stood over her for a moment. "That'll keep you quiet, so you don't cause me any trouble." He left and closed the door. I stared at the screen, frozen. What were those pills? Were they just extra sleeping pills, or something else? Suddenly, it all made sense. Her grogginess in the morning, her confusion, the fact that she sometimes could barely get out of bed for breakfast. He was sedating her. He was keeping her doped up so she'd be more docile, less of a problem during the day. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was dangerous. He could be overdosing her. He could kill her. That was the turning point. The rage in my chest turned into an icy fear and a desperate urgency. I couldn't do this alone anymore. Collecting videos wasn't enough. I was dealing with something far beyond my ability to handle. This wasn't a marriage problem anymore. This was a crime happening every night, just a few feet from where I slept. I saved the 5th video. I now had proof of verbal abuse, physical abuse, and the forced administration of medication. I had a clear pattern of behavior. I had his face, his voice, his crimes, all recorded in black and white. Enough. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my phone and looked up a number a friend had given me years ago for a different situation. A top-rated family law attorney in Atlanta. Her name was Aisha Johnson. I dialed the number. The receptionist answered in a professional voice. "Johnson Law Offices. Good morning." My voice came out steady, without a hint of a tremor. The actress had left the stage. Now the director was taking control. "Good morning. My name is Yolanda Williams. I need to make an urgent appointment with Miss Johnson," I said. "It's about my mother and my husband." I got an appointment for the next morning. I lied to Michael, told him I was meeting an old friend from college for coffee. The lie came with a frightening ease. I was getting used to this double life. I put the memory cards, each labeled with the corresponding date, into a small case and tucked it deep inside my purse like I was carrying a bomb. Aisha Johnson's office was downtown Atlanta, in a tall, mirrored building that felt impersonal and intimidating. But her office itself was different. It was warm, with comfortable armchairs and a stunning view of the city. Aisha was a woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a posture that radiated competence. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a kind smile. "Mrs. Williams, please, have a seat. My assistant said it was urgent. What can I do for you?" For a moment, the words wouldn't come. Now that I was here, about to air out the dirty laundry of my life to a complete stranger, the weight of it all hit me. I told her everything. I started with Daniel's death, my mother moving in, Michael's conditions, The first suspicions, the bruise, the confrontation, his denial. My voice was low, almost a whisper. I felt ashamed, as if the failure of my marriage and the abuse happening in my home were somehow my fault. Aisha listened patiently, without interrupting, just making a note here and there on a legal pad. When I finished, she looked at me with compassion, but not pity. "Yolanda," she said, her tone calm and steady. "Do you have any proof of this? Anything beyond your suspicions?" It was the question I was waiting for. "Yes," I said, my voice gaining strength. I opened my purse, took out the case, and placed it on the polished mahogany desk between us. "I have 5 nights of recordings." Her expression shifted. The compassion was replaced by an intense seriousness. "You installed a camera?" "Yes, in her room, with night vision. He doesn't know." She retrieved a laptop from her desk drawer and set it on the desk. "May I?" I nodded. She inserted the first card, the one with the threat. The video began to play. I watched her face as she watched. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes narrowed. When Michael's hissing voice filled the quiet office, "If you do, I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find." I saw a flash of pure indignation in Aisha's eyes. She said nothing. She just removed the first card and inserted the last one, the one with the forced medication. She watched the entire scene. The way he grabbed her chin, the way he forced the pills into her mouth. When the video ended, she slowly closed the laptop. The silence in the room was heavy. "Yolanda," she said finally, and her voice was pure ice. "What your husband is doing isn't just a marriage issue. This has a name. It's elder abuse. It's a felony. Coercion, battery, possibly unlawful administration of medication. We're talking about multiple criminal charges here." Hearing that from a professional, a lawyer, it validated everything. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't paranoid. It was real, and it was a crime. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, followed by a wave of fear. What do I do now?" I asked, my voice a thread. "Do I go to the police?" "Not yet," she said, leaning forward, her strategist mode fully engaged. "The police will want more than the videos. They're powerful, but his defense will try to discredit them. They'll say you doctored them, that they're out of context. They'll claim he was just giving her prescribed medication. We need one more piece. The most important piece, an official medical report, and if possible, your mother's testimony." My heart sank. "But she's so scared, Aisha. She lies to me to protect him or herself. She won't talk." "She'll talk to the right person in the right place," Aisha assured me. "She needs to feel completely safe, and we need a professional to document the injuries and her state of mind. Do you trust her family doctor?" "Dr. Hayes," I said instantly. "Yes, he's been Mom's doctor for over 20 years. He's a good man." "Excellent. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call Dr. Hayes' office. You'll say your mother had a small fall and you want him to check her out as a precaution. You need to get her in there. Once you are alone with him in the exam room, you are going to tell him everything. Exactly what you told me." "And then?" I asked. "Then you're going to let Dr. Hayes do his job. He'll examine her, document every bruise, every mark, and he will talk to her. In a medical setting, away from your husband, with you by her side, she might feel safe enough to tell the truth. And if she does, Dr. Hayes' report becomes our cornerstone. Medical evidence that corroborates your videos." The plan was clear. It was logical. But executing it felt like a mountain I had to climb. Getting my mom to the doctor, reliving it all in front of Dr. Hayes. "I know it's hard," Aisha said, as if reading my mind. "But this is the most crucial step. You have to be strong for her now, Yolanda. It's the only way to make sure what you saw on those tapes stops. For good." I left her office an hour later, my head spinning, but with a clear purpose. The Atlanta sun seemed brighter. I had a plan. I had an ally. I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. That night, I barely looked at Michael. When he asked about my coffee with a friend, I just said it was nice and changed the subject. After he went to bed, I slipped into my mother's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. "Mom, tomorrow morning we're going to see Dr. Hayes." Her eyes filled with panic. "Why? I'm fine, Yoli. I don't need a doctor." "I know, Mom, but I want him to look you over, just to make sure everything's okay with your blood pressure, with everything. Please, do it for me." She looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine, trying to read something I wasn't saying. Finally, she sighed, a sound of tired resignation. "All right, dear, if you insist." The next morning, after Michael left for work, I helped her get dressed. We were in the car, on the way to the clinic. Neither of us spoke. I drove with my hands gripping the steering wheel, and she stared out the window, lost in her own world. We got to the clinic. The nurse led us to an exam room. That familiar antiseptic smell. The nurse took her blood pressure, asked the routine questions, and said Dr. Hayes would be right in. Then the door closed, leaving us alone. Me and my mother, sitting in the silence of that sterile room, waiting. My heart was pounding in my throat. In a few minutes, that door would open again, and I would have to start talking. I would have to detonate the bomb. The minutes we waited for Dr. Hayes felt like hours. I sat in the plastic chair next to the exam table where my mother sat, her feet dangling, barely touching the floor. She said nothing, just stared at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. The paper covering the exam table crinkled with her every movement, the only sound in the room besides the low hum of the computer in the corner. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Hayes came in. He was a kind man, with graying hair and a smile that always seemed genuine. He had been my family's doctor since Daniel was just a boy. "Bernice, Yolanda, good morning," he said warmly. "So, I hear we had a little fall?" He turned to my mother. "Where does it hurt, sweetheart?" My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. I knew she was about to repeat the same rehearsed story about tripping. I had to intervene. Now. "Dr. Hayes," I started, my voice shaking just a little. "Actually, it wasn't a fall." He stopped looking at his chart and focused on me, his brow furrowed with concern. "No? What happened then?" I took a deep breath, the air feeling thick in my lungs. "I need to show you something. And I need to tell you a story. But please, you have to promise you'll listen to the whole thing." The seriousness in my tone disarmed him. He pulled over a small stool, sat down in front of us, and folded his hands. "Yolanda, you have my full attention." And so, I told him. I told him everything. My mother's move, the strange behavior, the fear, the bruises, and the camera. I described what I'd seen on the videos, the humiliation, the threats, the pills. As I spoke, I didn't look at the doctor. I looked at my mother. She was motionless, her head bowed, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face, dripping onto her hands. She wasn't denying it. She was crying because the truth was finally being spoken out loud. When I finished, a profound silence filled the room. Dr. Hayes was pale. He looked from me to my mother and back to me again. "My God, Yolanda," he whispered in shock. He stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. A soft click, but it sounded like a vault ceiling shut. He came back and knelt in front of my mother so his eyes were level with hers. His voice was the gentlest I had ever heard it. "Bernice," he said softly, "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me what Yolanda said. Is it true?" My mother lifted her head. Her face was ravaged with grief, but for the first time in months, the fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else, a deep exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who can't fight anymore. She looked at Dr. Hayes, the doctor she'd known for decades, and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's all true. He's been doing this to you, Bernice." "Michael?" "Yes," she repeated. He says I'm a burden, that I ruined his life. He wakes me up at night. He scares me." "And the marks, Bernice? The bruises?" he asked gently. "Does he hurt you?" She looked down at her own arm, as if seeing it for the first time. Hesitantly, she began to pull back the sleeve of her cardigan. With the doctor's help, she exposed her forearm. The thumbprint bruise, now yellowish, was still there. She showed him her wrist, where a new purple blotch was forming. "He squeezes me," she said, her voice a little stronger. "When he gets mad. He says if I tell Yoli, he'll send me to a bad place." Dr. Hayes examined each mark, his face a mask of grim professionalism. "And the pills, Bernice? Does he give you more medicine at night?" "Yes, he makes me take them. He says it's to keep me quiet." Dr. Hayes stood up. He went to his desk and began typing furiously at his computer, documenting every word, every injury he was seeing. He took pictures of the marks with a digital camera. Each click of the shutter felt like another nail being hammered into the coffin of my marriage. While he worked, I went to my mother and hugged her. She clung to me, her body trembling with sobs. "I'm sorry, Yoli," she whimpered into my shoulder. "I didn't want to cause you any trouble." "Shh, Mom, you did nothing wrong." "Nothing," I said, feeling my own hot tears soaking her hair. "This isn't your fault. I'm the one who's sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner." After several minutes, Dr. Hayes stopped typing. He printed out several pages and signed them. He turned to me, his face grave. "Yolanda, what you've described, and what Bernice has now confirmed, with the physical evidence I'm seeing, is a clear case of elder abuse. As a physician, Georgia state law classifies me as a mandatory reporter. That means I don't have a choice. I have a legal duty to report this situation to the proper authorities. Immediately." My heart leaped. I knew this was coming. Aisha had prepared me, but hearing the words out loud made it real, irreversible. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. He picked up the phone on his desk. "I'm going to call the Decatur Police Department. They will likely send a unit here, to the clinic, to take your statements and collect my report." He paused, looking at me. "Are you ready for this?" I looked at my mother, who now seemed a little calmer, more relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I held her hand. "Yes," I told Dr. Hayes, not looking away. "We're ready." He dialed the number. As he spoke to the dispatcher on the other end, explaining the situation in calm, clinical terms, I squeezed my mother's hand. The point of no return had been crossed. There was no going back now. 20 minutes later, we heard a soft knock on the exam room door. Dr. Hayes opened it. 2 uniformed police officers were standing in the hallway, an older man with a weary face and a younger woman with sharp, observant eyes. "Dr. Hayes?" the older officer asked. "I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Davis. We understand you have a situation to report." Dr. Hayes invited them in and closed the door. He handed the medical report to Officer Miller. "Everything I know is in there, but Mrs. Williams has something else for you." All eyes turned to me. With my hands shaking, but my heart resolute, I opened my purse, took out the small case, and retrieved the memory card with the video from the 5th night, the one with the explicit threat and the pills. "I recorded this 2 nights ago," I said, holding the card out to Officer Davis. "I think you need to see it." She took the small piece of plastic, her gaze curious. She pulled a laptop from a bag she was carrying. The screen flickered to life, and its cool blue light bathed all our faces. Officer Davis inserted the memory card into the laptop with a practical efficiency. She made a few clicks, and the grainy black and white image of my mother's room filled the screen. The exam room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the whir of the computer and my mother's nervous breathing beside me. Both officers leaned in to watch. I watched their faces. At first, their expressions were professionally neutral, but as Michael's silhouette entered the room, I saw their posture change. They grew more rigid, more focused. When the audio picked up Michael's venomous whisper waking my mother, Officer Davis exchanged a quick, sharp look with her partner. They watched the entire scene without a word. The humiliation, the grab of the chin, the pills forced down her throat, and then the threat. The camera captured his voice with chilling clarity. "I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find. Do you understand me?" When the video ended, Officer Davis didn't move for a second. She just stared at the screen, where my mother was now crying alone in the dark. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at me. The professional neutrality was gone. In its place was a cold, determined anger. "Mrs. Williams," she said, her voice controlled. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know for sure," I answered, my voice thick. "I started suspecting a few weeks ago. I started recording 6 nights ago." Officer Miller, who had been reading Dr. Hayes's report while watching the video, finally spoke. His voice was low and serious. The medical report corroborates what we've seen here. Bruising consistent with gripping and the victim's testimony. He turned to me. Is your husband home now? No, he's at work. He usually gets home around 6. The two officers looked at each other again, a silent communication passing between them. All right, Officer Miller said. Here's what we're going to do. Officer Davis and I will head back to the station to file this report and make sure we have everything we need for a warrant. Given the video evidence, I don't anticipate any issues. Mrs. Williams, I need you and your mother to go home and act as normally as possible. When your husband arrives, do not confront him. Do not say anything. We will be at your residence this evening to make the arrest. Go home. Act normal. The idea made my stomach clench. How could I look at his face, knowing what I knew, knowing what was coming? Is he violent? Officer Davis asked. Do you think you or your mother will be in any danger when he gets home? I don't know, I stammered. He's never been violent with me. I never imagined. Okay. If at any point you feel threatened, if he raises his voice, if anything feels off, you do not hesitate. You get your mother, you leave the house, and you call 911 immediately. Do you understand? I nodded, my heart pounding. They gave us a card with their names and a direct contact number. Dr. Hayes assured us he was available for whatever was needed. The appointment was over. The world as I knew it was over. The drive home was surreal. My mother, for the first time in a long time, seemed lighter. The act of finally telling the truth, of being believed, seemed to have freed her from a portion of her fear. She held my hand the whole way. I, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. Every car that passed me seemed suspicious. The drive home had never felt so long. The waiting was the worst part. The hours crawled by that afternoon with torturous slowness. I tried to read, but the words danced on the page. I tried to watch TV, but the sound was just background noise to the storm in my head. My mother stayed in her room napping. I envied her that brief peace. At 5:45, I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. My entire body went rigid. He was home. Michael walked in through the kitchen, whistling. He tossed his car keys on the counter. Hey, honey, long day. He came over and kissed my forehead. It took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. Hi, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. How was your day? The usual. Meetings, spreadsheets, a bore. He opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. Where's your mom? She's resting in her room, I replied, turning to the stove, pretending to be busy with dinner. The conversation was normal, painfully normal. He talked about a colleague, about the traffic. I answered in monosyllables, praying he wouldn't notice my trembling hands or the paleness of my face. Every minute was agony. Where are they? I thought. Please, just come. We were in the living room, the evening news on the TV, when it happened. A firm knock on the front door. It wasn't a visitor's knock. It was an official knock. Michael frowned. Are you expecting someone? No, I said, my heart in my throat. He got up and walked to the door. I followed him, stopping at the entrance to the living room. He opened the door, and there they were. Officer Miller and Officer Davis, standing under the porch light. Michael Williams? Officer Miller asked. Michael looked confused. Yes, can I help you? Sir, we're here to place you under arrest for felony elder abuse. The world seemed to stop for a second. The confusion on Michael's face turned to disbelief, then an incredulous laugh. What? Elder abuse? This is a mistake. There must be some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, sir, Officer Davis said, her voice cold. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, please. That's when it finally hit him. He looked at the officers, then he looked at me, standing in the doorway. Rage flashed in his eyes. Yolanda? What is this? What did you do? I didn't do anything, Michael, I said, my voice shaking. You did. This is ridiculous, he yelled, taking a step back. It's because of your mother, isn't it? She's been confused, making up stories. I didn't do anything. Officer Miller stepped forward. Sir, we've seen the video recordings. Those words hit him like a physical blow. All the air seemed to rush out of him. The anger, the denial. It all just drained away, replaced by a pale, silent shock. Video? He stammered, staring at me with wide eyes, betrayal and understanding dawning on his face. He didn't fight anymore. He turned around and put his hands behind his back. Officer Davis took out the handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking shut, locking around his wrists, was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard in my life. It was the sound of the end of 30 years. They read him his rights and led him outside. I stood in the open doorway, watching him being put in the back of the squad car. Before they closed the door, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, just a cold, desolate emptiness. The police car pulled away, its red and blue lights flashing silently down the dark street. The house fell into a profound silence, a silence unlike any other. It was the silence of the aftermath. I closed the door and leaned against it, my body finally giving in, shaking uncontrollably. I went up the stairs on heavy feet. My mother's door was ajar. She was standing by her bed, hugging herself. She had heard everything. Our eyes met across the hall. Neither of us said a word. I walked to her and wrapped her in my arms. And there, in the middle of the quiet house, mother and daughter finally cried together. Not from fear or from sadness, but from a painful, overwhelming relief. The threat was gone, but the long, dark road of justice was just beginning. The sound of the handcuffs was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another, perhaps even more exhausting one. The immediate threat inside the house was gone, but it was replaced by the slow, cold, impersonal machine of the justice system. Michael spent the night in jail. The next afternoon, I was notified that he'd been released on bail. The main condition was a full restraining order. He was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or my mother, and absolutely forbidden from returning to our home. A friend of his came by to pick up some of his clothes and personal items. I packed everything into cardboard boxes and left them on the front porch. I didn't see him. I didn't want to. The first thing I did was file for divorce. Aisha handled all the paperwork. Signing those documents felt strange. A stroke of my pen, undoing 30 years of history. There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. The man I had loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. All that was left was a stranger I needed to legally remove from my life. The house without him was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a peaceful quiet. I had the locks on all the doors changed. I took his pictures off the walls and out of the frames, packing them away in a box in the back of a closet. I needed to erase his presence, to reclaim this space as ours, as mine and my mother's. The months leading up to the trial were a blur of lawyers' meetings, depositions, and a constant, low-grade anxiety. I met the prosecutor assigned to the case, a strong, sharp black woman named Kenya Moore. She had a reputation for being relentless in the courtroom, especially in cases of abuse against the vulnerable. When I first met her, she looked me in the eye and said, "Mrs. Williams, I've seen the videos. We are going to get justice for your mother, I promise you." Her words gave me a strength I didn't know I still had. Preparing for the trial was the hardest part. Kenya needed my mother's testimony. But Bernice's dementia was a hurdle. There were good days where her memory was clear and she could recount the events in painful detail. And there were bad days where she was confused, forgot names, or simply retreated into a frightened silence. "Don't worry," Kenya told me during one of our meetings. "Her testimony is important, but the videos are our smoking gun. They speak for themselves. Her testimony just needs to confirm that the person in those videos is her, and the man is your son-in-law." In the meantime, our daughter Olivia flew in from Austin. The shock of the news had left her speechless. "Mom, Dad, I can't believe it," she'd repeated, crying on the phone. When she arrived, she rushed to hug her grandmother. Seeing Olivia's concern and love for her grandma was a balm to my wounded heart. She stayed with us for 2 weeks, helping care for Bernice, giving me a shoulder to cry on, and bringing a little bit of normalcy and laughter back into the house. Her presence helped my mother too. Olivia would spend hours with her, showing her pictures of her great-grandson on her phone, listening to the same old stories with patience and affection. Slowly, I saw a little of the old Bernice return, the sparkle in her eye, a more frequent smile. The fear that had haunted her for so long began to recede, replaced by the safety of being surrounded by people who loved her. but the shadow of the trial loomed over everything. 7 months passed. 7 months of phone calls, of preparation, of sleepless nights. Finally, the day arrived. It was a September morning, the air outside just starting to turn crisp, hinting at the coming fall. I put on my best suit, a navy blue one that made me feel professional, strong. I helped my mother into a pretty floral dress and a cardigan. Olivia, who had flown back in for the trial, wore a simple, somber dress. The three of us looked like 3 soldiers heading into battle. We drove to the DeKalb County Courthouse. The stone building felt imposing, cold. We walked inside, through the metal detectors. The sound of our heels echoed in the marble hallways. We met Kenya Moore at the courtroom door. "Are you ready?" she asked, her gaze steady. I took a deep breath. As ready as we'll ever be. We entered the courtroom. It was just like in the movies. The dark wood benches, the American flag, the seal of the state of Georgia on the wall. And on the other side of the room, sitting next to his lawyer, was Michael. My heart gave a painful jolt. He was thinner, his face drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore a suit that seemed a little too big for him. Our eyes met for a brief instant. I didn't see anger or remorse, just a cold emptiness. I looked away. We took our seats in the front row, right behind the prosecution's table. The bailiff called out, "All rise!" The judge, an older man with a stern face, entered and took his high-backed chair. "This court is now in session." The buzz of conversation stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge looked down at the papers in front of him. "We are here today for the trial of the state of Georgia versus the defendant, Michael Williams." Kenya Moore stood, straightening her blazer. Her movements were confident, precise. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed." The judge then turned to the defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit with a smug smile that I disliked on sight. "Is the defense ready?" "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said. The jury selection process began, and then the opening statements. I listened to Michael's lawyer paint a picture of a stressed man, caring for a difficult, senile mother-in-law whose accusations were the ramblings of a confused mind. I felt the anger rise in me, but Kenya put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's his job. Our job is to show them the truth." Then, it was time. Kenya Moore stood up, her gaze fixed on the judge. "Your Honor, the state calls its first witness to the stand, Yolanda Williams." My blood ran cold. The whole room seemed to turn and look at me. With my legs trembling, but my head held high, I stood up, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I sat down in the chair, feeling too high up, too exposed. Across the room, Michael stared at me, his face an unreadable mask. Kenya approached. "Mrs. Williams," she began, her calm, clear voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Please tell the jury, in your own words, why you installed a hidden camera in your mother's bedroom." Sitting there, on the witness stand, under the gaze of 12 jurors, the judge, and the man who was once my husband, I told our story. Kenya Moore guided me with calm, precise questions, helping me build the narrative for the jury. I spoke of my love for my mother, of her progressing dementia, of the decision to bring her into our home. I spoke of the first subtle changes, the fear that started to build in me, the unexplained bruises, and Michael's cold denial. "And what did you do when your concerns were dismissed, Mrs. Williams?" Kenya asked. "I bought a camera," I answered, my voice steady. "I had to know the truth. I had to know if I was going crazy or if my mother was in danger." Michael's defense attorney objected. Of course. He tried to paint me as a paranoid, hysterical wife who invaded the privacy of everyone in the house. On cross-examination, he was relentless. "So, you, with no concrete proof, just a feeling, decided to spy on your husband of 30 years?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I had the bruises on my mother's body and the fear in her eyes," I replied, looking directly at the jury. "For a daughter, that's all the proof you need to take action." My testimony lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time it was over, I was emotionally drained. But the hardest part was yet to come. "The state now calls Bernice Clark to the stand," Kenya announced. "With Olivia's help, My mother walked slowly to the witness stand. She looked so small and frail up there. The defense attorney immediately tried to have her disqualified, citing her dementia diagnosis. But the judge, after hearing Kenya's arguments and reading a report from Dr. Hayes about her general lucidity, allowed her to testify. Kenya was incredibly gentle with her. She asked simple, yes or no questions. "Mrs. Clark, do you recognize the man sitting at that table?" she asked, pointing to Michael. "Yes," my mother whispered. "That's my son-in-law, Michael." "Mrs. Clark, has this man ever woken you up in the middle of a night?" "Yes." "Has he ever said words to you that made you feel scared?" "Yes." "Has he ever grabbed you, hard, leaving marks on your arms?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Yes," she whimpered. It was enough. The defense attorney tried to confuse her on cross-examination, firing off rapid questions about dates and times, but she just shrank back and said, "I don't remember." Her fragility was more powerful than any answer. After her came Dr. Hayes, who presented his medical report and the photos of the bruises, explaining to the jury in clinical terms why the marks were consistent with forceful gripping and not accidental bumps. And then, the moment I had both waited for and dreaded for 7 months. "Your Honor," Kenya Moore said, "the state would now like to present the video evidence, marked as Exhibits A through E." A large TV screen was rolled out and turned to face the jury box. The bailiff dimmed some of the courtroom lights. The room fell into a tense hush. Kenya walked over to the TV. "We'll begin with the recording from February 28th, marked as Exhibit A." She pressed play. The grainy black and white image of my mother's room appeared on the screen. The jurors leaned forward. I couldn't watch it again. Instead, I watched Michael. He was sitting ramrod straight, his face as white as a ghost, his eyes locked on the screen, forced to relive his own crime. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the monster that lived in my house was laid bare. Michael's hissing voice threatening my mother echoed through the courtroom. The sound of him grabbing her chin, her gagging as he forced the pills down her throat. I could hear shocked gasps from the jury box. I saw one juror, a middle-aged woman, clap her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. By the time Kenya played the last video, the one with the explicit threat, the entire atmosphere in the room had shifted. The smugness was gone from the defense attorney's face. The jury no longer looked at me like a hysterical wife, or at my mother like a senile old woman. They looked at Michael, and in their eyes I saw disgust. Kenya Moore turned off the TV. The lights came back up. She turned to the jury, her face a mask of gravity. "The defense claims words were taken out of context," she said, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. "That actions were those of a stressed caregiver. But you saw it. There is no context in the world that justifies that cruelty. There is no amount of stress that justifies terrorizing a vulnerable 84-year-old woman in the middle of the night. What you saw, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, was not caregiving. It was torture. And now I ask you to deliver justice for Bernice Clark." The closing arguments were made. The judge gave his instructions to the jury, and then they filed out to deliberate. The wait was the longest of my life. Me, my mother, and Olivia sat on the courtroom bench, holding hands, not saying a word. What was there left to say? Michael and his lawyer sat across the room, in their own tense silence. An hour passed, then 2. The afternoon sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the courtroom. Finally, after almost 3 hours, the bailiff came in. "They have a verdict." My heart stopped. We all rose to our feet as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. They did not look at Michael. "They say that's a bad sign for the defense." They took their seats. The judge turned to the jury foreman, a middle-aged man with glasses. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor, we have," the man said. "In the case of the state of Georgia versus Michael Williams, on the charge of felony elder abuse, what is the jury's verdict?" The foreman unfolded a piece of paper. The rustle of the paper sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. He cleared his throat. He did not look at Michael. He looked directly at the judge. "On the charge of felony elder abuse, we the jury find the defendant." He paused for what felt like a lifetime. I held my breath, squeezing my mother's and my daughter's hands with all my might. Guilty. Guilty. The word hung in the courtroom air for a second before I truly processed it. A sob escaped me, a sound that was half cry, half relief. Beside me, Olivia began to weep silently. I turned to my mother. She wasn't crying. There was a calm, almost serene expression on her face, as if a storm that had been raging inside her for months had finally passed. Across the room, Michael didn't react. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his face blank, as if the verdict was for someone else. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't move. The arrogant, controlling man who had terrorized my mother in the dark looked small and pathetic under the courtroom lights. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. Kenya Moore argued that while Michael had no prior record, the calculated and repetitive nature of the abuse, the victim's vulnerability, and his complete lack of remorse demanded prison time. The judge agreed. Michael Williams was sentenced to 16 months in a state correctional facility, to be followed by 2 years of probation. 16 months. It didn't feel like a long time for the amount of pain he'd caused, but Kenya assured me that for a man of his standing, any prison time was a devastating fall from grace. He was taken into custody right from the courtroom. I didn't watch him as they led him away. To me, he was already long gone. While he was serving his time, our divorce was finalized. It was an uncomplicated process. He didn't contest a thing. The house in Decatur, the house we had built together, was mine. For the first time in over 30 years, I was the sole owner of my home. Life after the storm is a strange thing. The immediate danger is gone, but the wreckage is everywhere. For my mother, the physical wounds healed, the bruises faded, but the emotional scars ran much deeper. She had nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night calling my name, terrified. We started going to therapy together, which helped. Talking about what happened in a safe space helped her process the trauma and understand that the blame was never hers. For nearly a year, things got better. Olivia's constant presence, who reconciled beautifully with her grandmother, and the peace in our home did wonders for her. But dementia is a relentless thief. It doesn't stop. The improvement in Mom's emotional state didn't stop the disease's march on her mind. Her short-term memory began to fail more dramatically. She started getting lost inside her own home, not recognizing familiar objects. It got to a point where she needed 24-hour care, something I, with a broken heart, had to admit I could no longer provide on my own. The decision to move her into an assisted living facility was one of the hardest of my life. But with Olivia's help, we found an excellent place. A place with gardens and kind nurses and constant activities. The day she moved, we both cried. But when I saw her settled in her new armchair, looking out the window at a bed of roses, I knew it was right. I visited her. Every single day, without fail. Today, 5 years have passed since that trial. I'm 61 years old. I live alone in the house that was once full of laughter, then pain, and now a quiet, solitary peace. Michael was released from the correctional facility over 3 years ago. I don't know where he is, and I don't want to know. I heard through the grapevine from an old mutual friend that he moved upstate and lives a reclusive life. He lost his job, his friends, his family. He lost everything he tried to protect with his cruelty. My mother, Bernice, passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep. The dementia had taken her far away from us long before then, but I was by her side until the very last breath, holding her hand. She spent her final years in safety, surrounded by care, and knowing, even in her moments of confusion, that she was loved. And that, to me, was the real justice. Sometimes at night, I sit on the back porch, the same one Michael and I built, and I wonder. I replay our 30 years of marriage in my head. Were the signs always there? That impatience, that need for control, that subtle coldness? Did I just choose not to see them? Or did Daniel's death break him in a way so profound that a monster living dormant inside finally woke up? I don't think I'll ever have the answer. Maybe there isn't one. What I've learned from all of this is that evil, more often than not, doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. It comes with a familiar smile, with a logical excuse, with the face of someone you love. I've learned that you must always, always listen to that little voice inside you that says something is wrong. And I've learned the hardest way possible that the safety of a vulnerable person, be it a child or an elder, is worth infinitely more than keeping the peace, avoiding a confrontation, or saving the appearance of a marriage. You have to be their voice, their eyes, their strength. You have to act, even if it means tearing your own world down to save theirs. Today, I live a quiet life here in Decatur. Michael, from what I hear, is somewhere upstate. A man who lost everything. He lost his marriage, his home, his respect, and most importantly, the family he himself destroyed with his cruelty. I've learned that real strength isn't in enduring pain quietly, but in having the courage to turn on a light in the darkest of places. And sometimes, the family you fight to protect is the only thing that truly matters. So what would you do in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for all your support. On the screen now, you'll see some other stories I'm sure you'll like. Go ahead and click to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.